My name is Dana Hensley. I am 33 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life learning how to stand tall in rooms that were built to make me feel small. Last Christmas Eve, I sat in a chair I had known since childhood and watched my 8-year-old daughter, Kaya, reach for something that was actually a trap. My family had wrapped an empty box in beautiful paper with a fancy ribbon, not as a joke, but as a message. When Kaya lifted the lid and found nothing but cold air, my mother's laughter cut across the room like something metallic and sharp. My sister Brooke leaned toward us with an expression that wasn't a smile and said something I will not repeat to my daughter for as long as I live. Every aunt, every uncle, every cousin at that big table watched my little girl's tears begin to fall, and not one of them offered a single word of kindness. I sat with my hands in my lap and kept my face very still. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I let them believe, for just a little while longer, that they had won something. They had no idea that months before that evening, I had already signed every paper that mattered. And when the laughter faded and the empty box was tossed aside, Kaya did something that none of them saw coming. She wiped her eyes, walked across the room to her grandfather, and placed something small and carefully made into his tired hands. He opened it. The silence that followed was the kind that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. But to understand that moment, you have to go back to the Tuesday in early December when everything quietly began to shift. I was at my desk reviewing an estate plan for a client when my phone lit up with a name I rarely saw there: Walter Hensley. My father was a man of few words who preferred short, practical letters over phone calls. Him calling meant the ground was moving. When I answered, his voice sounded thin, like paper that had been folded too many times. He asked me to come home for Christmas and to bring the little one. I didn't say yes right away. It had been 6 years since I had spent Christmas at my parents' house. The last time, my mother had made Kaya sit at a small folding table in the kitchen, while my sister's children sat at the big table with the adults. Kaya was only 4. She didn't even complain, and that was the part that broke something in me. But my father said please. Walter Hensley was not a man who used that word lightly. He told me he was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes after a long day, but the kind that arrives when a person starts quietly counting how many holidays they might have left. His heart had been weakening for 2 years. His doctors used careful phrases like managing expectations. So I bought 2 plane tickets, packed Kaya's warm coat and her colored pencils, and told myself that one dinner wouldn't break us. On the flight, Kaya asked me to tell her the story about the lake. She wanted to hear about Grandpa's green metal fishing box and how he and Uncle Danny would stay out until the water looked like liquid gold in the late afternoon light. She had heard it 100 times and still wanted to hear it again because it was the one family story that didn't have a sad ending. At least, not yet. My brother Danny died 14 years ago, 3 days before Christmas. He was 19. I was 19 too. We were what people call Irish twins, born less than a year apart. He was working a late shift at a diner during a bad winter storm, driving roads that were glazed with ice you couldn't see until it was too late. His car hit a railing, and he was gone before anyone reached him. My mother never really came back from that. She built our family life around that absence, and every room in our hearts started to lean in the wrong direction. My younger sister Brooke became the daughter who stayed, who did everything right, who filled the space Danny left. I became the one who had left for college and wasn't home when it happened. My mother turned that into a story she told so many times that eventually everyone believed it. Dana was never there when it mattered. Brooke would nod. My father would look at the floor. And the word that followed me quietly through every family gathering was worthless. What none of them knew was that I had been carrying a secret about that night for 14 years. We arrived at the house around 4 in the afternoon. It looked like a Christmas card from the outside. Lights in every window, a giant wreath on the door, the smell of cinnamon drifting through the hallway. But it felt like a lock gate. My mother greeted everyone with warmth, and when she got to us, she gave me a small nod, the kind you give a delivery person. The living room held a towering tree, and the gifts beneath it told you everything you needed to know about who was loved in that house. Brooke's children had piles of presents. Kaya had one small silver box tucked in the back corner. On the shelf above the fireplace sat a snow globe my father had always treasured, A tiny cabin and a frozen lake inside. A gift Danny had bought him for $3 at a gas station years ago. Kaya spotted it immediately and asked her grandfather if that was the lake from the stories. My father moved slowly toward her, his knees giving him trouble, and held the globe down so she could see it properly. For a moment, the two of them laughed together, and the house almost felt like something it wasn't. I watched from the doorway and noticed how much his hands were shaking. He looked like a man hollowed out by years of keeping the wrong kind of peace. Kaya leaned close to him and whispered that she had made him something special, but he had to wait until later to see it. She had been working on a secret project for weeks at our kitchen table, hiding it whenever I came near. Dinner was a performance my mother directed without lifting a cooking spoon herself. Brooke was the star helper. I was sent to the garage for the old mismatched chairs. When Kaya asked if she could help with anything, Brooke told her to stay out of the way. I gave Kaya the napkins to fold instead, and she made them into perfect little triangles that nobody acknowledged. During appetizers, my mother counted out servings carefully and left none for Kaya. I quietly split my own plate with my daughter and said nothing about it. Brooke made a comment over her whine about my work as an estate attorney, suggesting that my whole career was built around people who had no one left in their lives. Her husband, Greg, arrived late, and before he even sat down, he asked her quietly whether she had printed the paperwork. They exchanged a look I recognized from years of reading people. They were hiding something and had a plan for that evening. I tucked that observation away and kept clearing dishes. After dinner, my father asked me to come out to the garage with him. It was cold and smelled like oil and old wood, and he stood there looking at his fishing box for a long moment before he spoke. He told me he had finally put things in order. He said he was the only person in the family he truly trusted anymore. He told me he should have stood up for me years ago instead of choosing silence to keep the peace, and that he was sorry for every time he had looked at the floor instead of looking at me. Sorry to get back 14 years, but the way he said it, quietly in that cold garage, like a man confessing something he had needed to say for a very long time, was the most honest thing I had heard from my family in years. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Back inside, my mother made an announcement that landed like a stone in still water. She and my father, she said, had decided to leave the lake house to Brooke, because Brooke's children deserved to grow up with that kind of memory. My father stared at the snow globe and said nothing. That lake house was the last place he had ever been completely happy. I kept my expression neutral, because I already knew things my mother didn't know I knew, and the evening wasn't over yet. Then came the family photograph. Brooke organized it with cheerful efficiency and announced it was only for the grandchildren who came every weekend. She said it pleasantly, as if it were simply a logistical observation. But what she was really saying to my daughter was that she didn't belong here. Kaya didn't cry. She just made herself smaller on the couch, which was somehow worse to watch than tears would have been. I took Kaya outside for some fresh air. She looked up at me and asked, in the clear and serious way that 8-year-olds ask questions they already half know the answer to, why Grandma didn't like us. I told her it was about Grandma's own heart and had nothing to do with us. She nodded like she was trying to believe me. I was trying to believe it myself. When we came back inside, I saw Brooke's phone face up on the kitchen counter with a message visible on the screen. It was from a group chat that included my mother. They had planned the empty box for Kaya deliberately to, as my mother had written, teach her her place. There was more. They were also planning to have my father sign over the lake house and the remainder of his savings that very night, while the family was gathered and the pressure of the room was on their side. They believed he was too confused and too tired to resist or to fully understand what he was putting his name to. I went back out to the garage alone. In my father's old fishing box was a folder. Several months earlier, my father had driven 3 hours to my law office without telling anyone. He had been watching Brooke and Greg's behavior shift for over a year, the careful questions about his accounts, the gentle suggestions about what would be easiest for everyone when the time came. He knew what was happening. He just needed someone he trusted to help him do something about it quietly before it became a confrontation. He didn't have the strength to survive. He had already signed every document that mattered. I was his attorney of record, his healthcare proxy, and the executor of his estate. His assets were protected. The lake house was not going anywhere Brooke and Greg intended it to go. I had kept it professionally confidential because my father had asked me to, and because he wasn't ready yet for the weight of what would follow when it came out. That night, it came out. At 8 o'clock, my mother gathered everyone for gifts. It was a production, expensive things unwrapped with enthusiasm, children squealing, Brooke receiving something from a jewelry box with practiced gratitude. Then it was Kaya's turn. She crossed the room with real hope on her face, sat down with that small silver box in her lap, and lifted the lid. Empty. My mother laughed. She said, in front of the whole room, that children like Kaya shouldn't expect too much. Brooke called it a life lesson. Several people at the table smiled. My daughter sat there with tears running quietly down her face, and she took a breath. And then she did something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She reached into her sweater and pulled out the envelope she had been secretly working on for weeks. She stood up, walked past every adult in that room, and placed it in her grandfather's hands. My father opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing, careful and detailed, the work of a child who had taken her time, showing the lake, with 3 figures standing together at the water's edge. One was my father. One was me. One was a young man my daughter had never met. She had written across the bottom, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, that we missed Danny too. My father wept, not the polite kind of crying that happens at family gatherings, but real, deep tears from somewhere that had been locked a long time. When he steadied himself, he looked at my mother and told her he was finished with the lies. Then he told the whole room something he had been holding for 14 years. It was Brooke who was supposed to pick Danny up from work that night. She had promised. But she went to a party instead and didn't tell anyone, and Danny drove himself home on icy roads and never made it. My father had found out years later and had said nothing because he didn't know how to carry it alongside everything else, and because saying it would have broken what little was left of the family. Brooke went pale. Greg reached into his jacket and produced the papers they had been planning to use that night. He placed them in front of my father with a smile that had no warmth in it and told him it was time to get things settled while everyone was tog. Ether. I set down my glass and spoke in the voice I use in courtrooms. I told them that those documents were unenforceable. I explained that my father had retained me as his attorney months ago and had already executed a full estate plan, a durable power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. Every asset was accounted for and properly titled. There was nothing left for them to take. My father's affairs were in order, and his wishes were protected. Their plan was over. The room was very quiet after that. My father stood up slowly, steadied himself, and said he was leaving with us. He said he was done living inside a house that had been running on secrets and cruelty for longer than any of us should have allowed. He thanked Kaya for the drawing and held it carefully, like something fragile and valuable. We drove to a hotel that night. My father fell asleep in the back seat with Kaya leaning against his shoulder. That winter, he moved into my guest room. He and Kaya go fishing together every Saturday now. He teaches her the names of things, clouds, fish, the particular color the water turns in late afternoon, and she draws pictures of everything he shows her. My mother and Brooke have not changed. I have stopped waiting for them to. If anyone has ever handed you an empty box and called a life lesson, I want you to know something. The people who do that are not revealing your worth. They are revealing their own emptiness. You don't need their approval to understand who you are. Quiet people are watching everything. And sometimes the most powerful thing in a room is an 8-year-old girl with a drawing in her pocket and the courage to walk across a cold room and hand someone the truth.